There is a certain kind of child who arrives in the world already wide open. They feel the shift in temperature before anyone else in the room has noticed. They sense the quiet tension beneath their mother's smile that she thinks she has hidden. They cry at things the other children walk past, the moth with the torn wing on the windowsill, the old man eating alone at the far table, the dog waiting at the door long after the person who left is not coming back. They carry inside a very small body an emotional register that was built for a much larger and more complicated life than the one they are currently living. And they learn, slowly at first, then all at once, that this is a problem. Not from a single conversation, not from one particular cruelty, but from the accumulated weight of small moments. The sigh when they cry again. The impatience in the voice that says you are too sensitive. The way a room adjusts slightly when they enter, the way people brace ever so gently for whatever this child is about to feel. The birthday party where everyone else was laughing, and they were overwhelmed in a corner by something they could not name. The classroom where the teacher moved on, and they were still sitting with the weight of what had just been said, unable to understand how no one else seemed to be carrying it. These moments do not arrive as lessons. They arrive as verdicts. And the verdict, received again and again in 100 different forms before the child has any language to contest it, is this: what you are feeling is too much. And the fact that you feel it this way means something is wrong with you. So they learn to manage it, to fold the feeling into something smaller and quieter that can fit inside the acceptable dimensions of the world they are living in. They learn to perform the correct emotional register for each room, not out of dishonesty, but out of survival. They learn to apologize for their own interior weather, to laugh when they are devastated, to say nothing when the thing they are feeling is so large it has no available words, to make themselves, in every practical sense, easier. They become very good at it. And they carry, in the place where their full self used to live freely, a quiet and persistent grief that they cannot explain to anyone. Because the very people they would explain it to are the ones who taught them, without meaning to, that the feeling was too much to begin with. If you were that child, if any part of what I just described lands with the particular heaviness of something you have known from the inside, then I want you to stay with me. Because everything you were taught about what you are, about what your feeling means, about what the depth of it says about your capacity to manage the world, was wrong. Not incomplete, not slightly off, wrong. And the truth that lives on the other side of that wrongness, the truth about what your sensitivity actually is and what it actually contains, and what it has quietly been building inside you all this time, that is what this is about. Share in the comments where you are watching from, and whether this is something you were told about yourself as a child, that you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Because I think more people are carrying that verdict than anyone realizes. And there is something important about hearing it named out loud. Stay until the end of this video, because what I am going to share changes not just how you understand the sensitive child, it changes how you understand yourself right now as an adult who was once that child. Before we go further, let me say something clearly. Feeling too much is not a flaw in the architecture of who you are. It is not evidence of weakness. It is not a developmental failure or a psychological fragility or the symptom of something that needs correcting. It is a way of being in the world that the world, in its impatience, does not always know how to receive. Those are very different things, and the difference matters enormously. The problem was never your feeling. The problem was the room you were given to feel it in. Let me tell you about Elias, Elias was the kind of child who noticed everything. The subtle shift in his father's voice before an argument that hadn't started yet. The way his teacher smiled differently on Fridays than she did on Mondays. The sadness that lived permanently in the eyes of the grocery store clerk who always said she was fine. He noticed the quality of the light at the end of summer and felt it as a kind of mourning. He noticed when a friend was hurting before the friend knew it themselves. He noticed with startling precision the invisible emotional weather of every room he walked into. He was 6 years old when all of this started to feel like a problem. His family was not unkind. His father was steady, practical, a man who moved through the world by managing it, who had learned early that feelings, left uncontrolled, were liabilities. His mother was warm in the ways she knew how to be warm, which mostly meant ensuring things were running smoothly, that the house was in order, that the visible needs were met. Neither of them had been given the language for what Elias was doing. Neither of them had been raised in a home that treated emotional depth as anything other than excess. So when Elias cried at the end of a film that no one else was crying at, his father did not know what to do with it. When Elias came home from school carrying the weight of something a classmate had said, not something said to him, but something said to another child, and could not shake it by dinner, his mother did not have the tools to help him process it. When Elias said he was scared, without being able to point at anything specific, his father said the thing that fathers who are taught not to feel have always said to sons who feel too much. You need to toughen up. He didn't mean it cruelly. He was giving his son the only gift he knew how to give. The armor he himself had been handed at roughly the same age by a father who had also not known what to do with a boy who felt things. But Elias heard it the only way a child can hear it, as a verdict on him, on the part of him that was most alive. By the time Elias was 9, he had developed a second self, not a false one, exactly. Something more complicated than that. A version of himself that moved through the world in the way the world seemed to need him to move. Capable, composed, not easily rattled. He learned to notice when he was about to feel something large and redirect it somewhere it would not show. He learned to be useful in emotional situations, to be the one who stayed calm while others panicked, to ask the right questions, to intuit what a person needed and provide it without being asked. He became remarkably good at being with people in pain because he had spent his entire short life learning to translate pain into something manageable. On the outside, it looked like maturity. On the inside, it felt like a slow, quiet disappearing. The part of him that felt, really felt, the full, uncensored version went somewhere else. Somewhere private and unreachable by the people who had made it clear, without ever intending to, that it was not welcome in the room. Carl Jung would have called that place the shadow. The shadow is not the darkness in us. It is the depth in us. The parts we buried, not because they were dangerous or wrong, but because the world we grew up in did not have space for them. The emotion we were told was excess. The sensitivity we were told was weakness. The feeling that was so large and so real that we learned to put it away before anyone could see it and use it as evidence against us. Elias grew up. He became the person that years of managing himself had built, intelligent, perceptive, unusually good at reading people and situations, capable of functioning in almost any emotional climate. People described him as calm, reliable, solid. He was 31 years old before a therapist said something that cracked the frame he had built around his own story. The sensitivity you learn to hide is not separate from your strength. It is the source of it. He sat with that for a long time. He is still sitting with it. Elias's story is not just his story. It is the story of every child who was told, in one form or another, that the depth of what they felt was a problem to be solved, rather than a gift to be understood. Every child who learned to perform smallness in order to remain safe. Every child who took the most alive part of themselves and put it somewhere no one could touch it, not knowing that they were putting their greatest strength out of reach, along with their greatest pain. That child grew into an adult, and that adult is, in all probability, watching this right now. And what I want to give you in the next part of this is not just an explanation, not just a psychological framework that makes the wound make sense. I want to give you something that changes the way you see what that child was carrying, and what they never stopped carrying, even when they learned not to show it. Because here is what the research tells us. Here is what decades of psychology and neuroscience and the quiet, careful work of people who study how the human mind actually develops have been pointing toward, and what most people who carry this particular wound have never been told. The child who felt too much was not broken. They were built for something. And when you understand what that something is, when you see the full architecture of what their sensitivity was actually constructing inside them all along, the story you have been telling about that child changes completely. Hold that, because we are going there now. In 1996, a psychologist named Elaine Aron published research that named something that millions of people had been living inside without ever having a word for it. She called it high sensitivity. The formal term is sensory processing sensitivity. And what she found through years of careful research that has since been replicated and expanded was not what the world had assumed about people who felt too much. Aron's research showed that approximately 15 to 20% of the population is born with a nervous system that processes sensory and emotional input more deeply than average, not more dramatically, not more theatrically, more deeply. The highly sensitive person does not simply feel more. They process more, with greater nuance, greater awareness of subtlety, greater capacity to notice what others walk past. Their brains, when observed in neuroimaging studies, show significantly higher levels of activation in the regions associated with attention, awareness, and depth of processing when responding to emotional stimuli. In other words, and I want this to land properly, the child who cried at things no one else was crying at was not overreacting. Their brain was doing more work. They were perceiving more, processing more, integrating more, carrying more of the actual emotional content of their environment than the people around them even knew was there. That is not weakness. That is an extraordinarily sophisticated form of intelligence. But here is where it becomes something more than a neurological fact. Here is where the psychology deepens into something that I think changes the story entirely. Aron also found that highly sensitive children are disproportionately shaped by their early environment, both for better and for worse. A sensitive child raised in a nurturing, emotionally attentive environment shows outcomes significantly above average in areas of creativity, empathy, emotional intelligence, and the capacity for meaningful relationship. The same child raised in an environment of criticism, emotional unavailability, or chronic dismissal shows outcomes significantly below average in those same areas. The sensitivity itself is neutral. It is a lens. Turned toward warmth, it magnifies warmth. Turned toward wound, it magnifies wound. and most children who felt too much were turned in the early years toward the wound. This is not your fault. This is not your parents' fault in any simple sense. It is the consequence of a sensitivity being given to a child before the people responsible for that child had any language for what they were holding. They were given a gift they did not know how to receive. And what was lost in the gap between what you needed and what they knew how to give, that is a real loss. It deserves to be named as one. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the interior landscape of the human being, and what he found through decades of clinical work and observation was that the parts of a person they are most pressured to suppress in childhood do not disappear. They go underground. Jung called this the shadow, not the evil part of us as it is so often misrepresented, but the full part of us, the parts that were told to be quiet, the feelings that were too large for the room, the needs that were labeled excessive, the depths that were treated as problems. All of it deposited into an interior place the person learns, very early, not to look at directly. And above the shadow, they build what Jung called the persona, the mask, the functional face that the world can receive without becoming uncomfortable. For the child who felt too much, the persona is often extraordinarily well crafted, composed, reliable, seemingly unrattled. The persona says, "I am fine. I can handle this. I do not need anything from you that will inconvenience you." And it works. It works well enough to get through the day, well enough to be praised for maturity, well enough to move through the world without the constant friction of being too much for every room you enter. But the shadow does not stop existing because it has been put away. It grows, it deepens. It becomes, over years, a vast interior country that the person carries with them everywhere, rarely visited, never quite forgotten, always pressing at the edge of the composed surface they show to the world. Jung said something about this that I have never been able to improve upon. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. For the child who buried their sensitivity, who learned to call their feeling a flaw and put it somewhere unreachable, the shadow contains something they have never once thought to look for there. It contains their greatest strength. And that is the paradox that lives at the center of this entire story. The very thing the world told that child was their weakness. The feeling, the depth, the sensitivity that was too much for every room is the same thing that has been quietly constructing something extraordinary inside them all along. And when you see what it has been building, you will understand why the wound and the gift were never two separate things. Hold that, because this is where everything changes. Here is the paradox that the child who felt too much was never told. The sensitivity that was treated as excess, the feeling that was too large, too frequent, too inconvenient for the world to hold comfortably, did not disappear when they learned to suppress it. It went into the shadow, and in the shadow, it did what all things do when they are left to develop without interference. It grew, it deepened. It became something the world does not have a simple name for yet, a kind of interior intelligence that operates far below the surface of the person's visible life, quietly assembling a set of capacities that most human beings spend their entire lives trying to develop and never quite reach. Let me be specific, because this is not philosophy. This is documented, researched, observable. The child who felt too much typically develops over the years of learning to manage their sensitivity while still living inside it, a depth of empathy that is neurologically distinct from ordinary emotional resonance. Researchers studying mirror neuron activity in highly sensitive individuals have found that their neural mirroring response, the brain mechanism that allows a person to feel what another person is feeling, is measurably more active. They do not simply understand that another person is in pain. They register the pain in the same neurological circuits that would fire if the pain were their own. This means the sensitive person is not being metaphorical when they say they feel what another person is going through. They are being neurologically accurate. Their brain is, quite literally, experiencing a version of the other person's emotional state. The felt sense they carry, that they were taught was weakness, was excess, was too much, is actually one of the most sophisticated forms of human attunement that the nervous system is capable of producing. But the strength does not stop there. Because the child who felt everything and then learned to process everything quietly also developed, often without knowing it, an extraordinary capacity to hold complexity, to sit with contradiction, to remain present inside experiences that would cause other people to close down or simplify or retreat into the comfort of a clear verdict. They learned this the hard way, by having no choice, by living in emotional environments that were too complex for their age and being forced, year after year, to find a way to stay inside the complexity rather than escape it. That training, which felt like suffering at the time, and was suffering at the time, was also a kind of education that cannot be replicated in any classroom or absorbed from any book. It built in them the capacity for a specific kind of wisdom that the world desperately needs and chronically undervalues. The wisdom of the person who has been to the deep end and come back, who knows what it is to carry something wordless and heavy and not be destroyed by it, who can sit with another person in their worst moment without flinching, without reaching for a solution to make their own discomfort stop, without reducing the person's pain to something manageable so that the room can return to normal. They can simply stay, present and willing and unafraid of the depth. That is not a small thing. In a world that has become extraordinarily skilled at the management of feeling, at the quick fix and the positive reframe and the move forward, that capacity to simply stay is one of the rarest and most necessary human gifts there is. But there is another side of this that is harder to see. And it is the side that the adult who was that child most needs to hear. Because the strength that the sensitive child built, the empathy, the depth, the capacity to hold complexity and stay present inside pain, that strength is real, it is extraordinary, and it is also, in the life the adult is now living, partially hidden, partially inaccessible, still living in the same shadow where they put their feeling as a child when the world made it clear the feeling was too much to show. And this means something specific and important. The person who is the sensitive child often does not recognize their own greatest gift. They live with a persistent, low-level sense that there is something excessive about them, something that needs managing, containing, keeping out of sight. They apologize for feeling things. They second-guess their own perceptions. They have been trained, across years, to treat their depth as a liability rather than a resource. And so they carry, into every relationship and every room and every version of their adult life, both the extraordinary gift and the habit of hiding it, both the strength and the story that the strength is a problem. Rainer Maria Rilke, who understood, perhaps better than almost anyone who has ever written in any language, what it means to feel deeply in a world that rewards feeling shallowly, wrote something that I come back to when I think about this. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once, with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. The sensitivity you were taught to fear, the depth you were taught to manage, the feeling that was always so large and so real and so inconvenient for the rooms you were given to live in. It was not a dragon. It was never a dragon. It was the most extraordinary thing about you, waiting, with more patience than it should have needed, for the moment you would stop running from it and recognize it for what it always was. So what does it mean to reclaim it? Not in a dramatic, sudden way. That is not how the work of this kind actually happens. But slowly, in the way that all real and lasting change happens, quietly, non-linearly, through the accumulation of small decisions that look from the outside like almost nothing. The first step is the most important, and it is the one that most people who carry this wound skip over in their hurry to reach the part where they feel better. It is grief. Real, unhurried, properly allowed grief for the child who was told, in 1,000 small ways before they had any way to contest the verdict, that the most alive part of them was a problem. For the years spent managing and containing and apologizing. For the relationships where they showed up as less than what they were because the full version did not seem to fit. For the rooms that were too small. For the conversations that stayed shallow. For the self that went into the shadow before it ever had the chance to find out what it was capable of. That grief is not weakness, it is the beginning of accuracy. Because until the wound is felt clearly, not managed, not reframed, not resolved too quickly into a lesson, it continues to operate from underneath, quietly directing, quietly repeating. The sensitivity turned not outward toward the world, where it might become a gift, but inward, where it becomes a constant source of evidence for the story that something is wrong. The second step is what Jung called the integration of the shadow, which sounds complicated, which is actually very simple. It means going back to the thing that was buried and picking it up again, not performing it for anyone else, not turning the sensitivity into an identity or a brand or a personality type to announce at social gatherings. Simply privately, in the quiet of your own life, allowing the depth back in, letting yourself feel things at the full volume they actually arrive at, rather than the adjusted, socially acceptable version you have been managing toward for years. Letting the moth with the torn wing matter the way it always actually mattered. Letting the quality of the light at the end of summer be what it is without telling yourself that you are being excessive for noticing it. Letting the feeling be the full size it actually is. This is not regression. This is not going backwards to the overwhelmed child in the corner of the birthday party. This is the adult with all the resilience and the tools and the hard-earned capacity for complexity, going back to collect the part of themselves they were forced to leave behind, and bringing it forward into a life that is now, for the first time, large enough to hold it. The third step, and this is the one that takes the longest and asks the most, is learning to offer the gift. The empathy that was built in the shadow does not stay in the shadow once it is reclaimed. It becomes available. It becomes the quality of presence that other people feel when they are with you and cannot entirely explain. The sense of being genuinely received, genuinely held, genuinely met by someone who does not flinch from the full weight of what they are carrying. That presence is rare. It is built over a lifetime, and it was built without anyone planning it that way in the years that felt like too much. The years that were, it turns out, exactly enough. If you were the child who felt too much, And I think you know by now whether you were. Then I want you to hear something that I mean with complete precision. You are not broken. You are not excessive. You are not the problem in every room that found you difficult to hold. You were a child with a nervous system built for depth, placed in environments that were organized around shallowness. That is a mismatch. It is a painful and genuinely costly one. But it is not a verdict on your worth or your capacity or the legitimacy of what you carry. The feeling was always real. The depth was always real. The sensitivity that was told, again and again in so many forms for so many years, that it was too much. It was never too much. It was exactly enough. It was, in fact, the most important thing about you. And it has been building something inside you, quietly, without credit, without recognition, across every year you spent learning to contain it. The empathy you carry is extraordinary. Not because you were born lucky, but because it was forged in the specific furnace of feeling everything in a world that rewarded feeling nothing. The wisdom you carry about what it means to stay present inside pain, to not flinch, to not simplify, to not reach for the quick resolution that makes the room comfortable at the expense of the truth. That wisdom was purchased with every moment you were asked to manage your own interior weather alone and still manage to show up. That is not weakness by another name. That is the most resilient thing a human being can do. You are allowed to stop apologizing for the depth of what you feel. You are allowed to stop performing smallness for rooms that were always too small to begin with. You are allowed to grieve the years that were spent managing rather than living. You are allowed to go back for the part of yourself that was put away and bring it forward into the life you are living now. You are allowed to be, fully and without apology, exactly as much as you have always actually been. Because here is the truth that sits at the very bottom of all of this. The world does not need more people who have learned to feel nothing. It has an abundance of those. It has practiced, for centuries, the art of building people who can move through pain without registering it, who can witness suffering without being changed by it, who can sit across from a human being in their worst moment and not quite be there with them because the depth required for genuine presence was trained out of them before they knew what they were losing. What the world is desperately short of is people who can feel everything and stay, who have been to the deep end and come back, who carry, in the place where their wound used to live unexamined, a quality of presence that can hold another person without needing to fix them or shrink them or make their pain more manageable for the sake of the room. The child who felt too much grew into the adult the world most needs. They just were not told. They are being told now. The feeling was never the problem. The room was always the problem. And you, the one who felt everything, who carried it alone, who learned to put it somewhere no one could see it and still showed up every single day. You were never too much. You were, all along, exactly what was needed.